She was just a maid working quietly in a billionaire's mansion, until one day she was arrested without any proof. Everyone believed she was guilty, everyone except the billionaire's autistic son, who couldn't speak much but what he showed. Through his silence and his drawings, exposed a secret that changed everything and revealed the real criminal. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. The Thornfield mansion was large, expensive, and always quiet. The walls were thick, the windows were tall, and the rooms were always clean and perfect. But even in that silence, one person made the house feel alive: Angela, the housemaid. Angela didn't speak loudly or make noise, but her calm and caring way made the whole place warmer. She walked through the halls with soft steps, always ready to help, always smiling gently. Ethan, the 7-year-old son of Charles Thornfield, was the only one who truly responded to her. Ethan didn't talk to anyone else, not even his father, who was too busy with business and meetings. But with Angela, he felt safe. He trusted her. Diagnosed with autism when he was 2 years old, Ethan had trouble connecting with people. But Angela never forced him to speak. She didn't rush him. Instead, she paid attention to what he liked, how he liked things to be, and followed his lead patiently and kindly. Every morning, Angela would prepare Ethan's favorite toys. She knew he liked things a certain way. She would carefully place his colored blocks on the floor, arranging them by color, just how he liked it. Reds in one line, blues in another, and so on. Then she would sit down beside him on the carpet, not too close, and start humming soft songs. The tunes were simple, easy to follow, and they never changed suddenly. Angela had learned that Ethan didn't like surprises. Sometimes he would hum along in his own quiet way, and Angela would smile, never interrupting. She watched how he played, how he repeated small movements with focus and care. She understood that these actions made him feel calm. She never told him to stop or change. Instead, she helped keep that calm space around him, where he felt in control. Angela didn't just work there for Ethan. She was the only person who truly saw him for who he was. While Ethan and Angela had their quiet, peaceful moments, Charles Thornfield spent most of his time away from them. He was a billionaire, always in his office, always behind closed doors, talking on the phone or staring at a computer screen. Meetings, emails, phone calls, that was his world. He said he loved his son, but his actions said otherwise. When he did speak to Ethan, it was quick, almost cold, like he was checking off a task. He didn't know what Ethan liked or needed. He didn't even ask. Charles thought giving Ethan a nice house and toys was enough. But Ethan didn't need more toys. He needed someone to understand him. That someone was Angela. She never asked for thanks. She just kept doing what she knew Ethan needed. Sometimes, Charles would look at Angela with curiosity, wondering why Ethan acted differently around her. But he didn't say anything. For now, she was just a helper, just a maid doing her job. Angela never saw herself as someone special. She had worked in houses before, but this job was different. She had never connected with a child like this. With Ethan, she didn't need to use many words. Her presence was enough. She had learned to read his small gestures, a quick look, a tiny smile, a sudden movement of his hand. She noticed when he was tired, when he was overwhelmed, and when he felt safe. Ethan never told her these things with words, but she understood them anyway. Angela also made sure the environment was good for him. She kept the lights soft, avoided loud sounds, and always stayed nearby without being too close. She even changed how she moved and spoke around him. She did all this because she cared. Ethan had slowly let her into his world, a world many people found hard to reach, and in that world, Angela felt like she had a purpose bigger than cleaning or serving. In the afternoons, Angela and Ethan had a small routine. She would take him to the backyard garden, where there were plants, flowers, and a little bench under a tree. Ethan liked the patterns of the leaves and the feeling of the grass. He would touch the ground with his fingers, press leaves between his hands, and watch insects crawl with serious focus. Angela always stayed close, making sure he felt safe, never pushing him to play a certain way. Sometimes she would read from a picture book in a soft voice, even if Ethan didn't look at it. Other times, she just sat in silence, watching him explore. Ethan seemed to relax in those moments. They didn't need to talk. Being together was enough. Angela made sure every moment stayed calm, just how Ethan liked it. The garden became their safe space, away from the cold walls of the mansion and away from Charles's busy world. Angela knew that to Charles, she was just a housemaid. He paid her salary and expected her to do her work. She cleaned the rooms, prepared meals, and made sure everything was in place. But with Ethan, things were different. She was more than an employee. She was his safe person, the one he trusted, the one who understood. Charles never noticed how important she was to Ethan. He saw her as useful, someone who helped keep his son quiet and happy, but not someone who truly mattered. But Angela didn't care what Charles thought. Her focus was on Ethan. Every day she gave him the calm, organized world he needed. Ethan, who didn't talk to others, smiled when he saw her. He didn't need to say anything. In his quiet way, he showed that Angela was his comfort. She wasn't part of the Thornfield family, but for Ethan, she was everything. And to Charles, she was just a tool, at least for now. Charles Thornfield was not just a man with money. He was a man with power. Everyone in the financial world knew who he was. He owned one of the biggest investment networks in the country and sat on important business boards that influenced national decisions. People listened when he spoke. At events, others made room for him. Business people wanted his approval. Journalists wrote about his leadership. But behind that success, there was something different about him. His eyes were cold, and his smile never felt real. Even his closest partners noticed the way he stared, like he was always planning something, always thinking 3 steps ahead. He didn't laugh much, and when he did, it sounded forced. At home, Charles was a different man. He wasn't calm or friendly. He didn't talk to his son kindly. He didn't thank his staff. He expected everything to be perfect without having to ask twice. If someone failed, he didn't forgive easily. Everyone knew to stay careful around him. Angela had worked in many houses before, but this one was different. Most of the time, the rich people she worked for ignored her. That was normal. But Charles Thornfield was not just distant. He was intense. He rarely looked at her, but when he did, it felt like he was measuring her, as if checking how useful she really was. He didn't say much, but the way he walked, the way he closed a door, or the way he held his phone during meetings, it all showed one thing: control. Everything in the mansion followed a strict routine. Breakfast was always served at the same time. The living room had to be cleaned before noon. Nothing could be out of place. Charles liked order, but more than that, he liked control. He watched the security cameras often. He asked short, sharp questions. And when things didn't go as planned, it wasn't rare to hear him yelling or see a door slammed hard. Angela never spoke unless asked, but she noticed everything. One thing that caught Angela's attention early on was the black briefcase. It wasn't large, but it looked expensive and important. Charles kept it inside a cabinet in his office, and the cabinet always stayed locked. Angela never touched it. She only cleaned the room, dusted the furniture, and emptied the trash, like always. But every time she walked into that office, she saw the black briefcase sitting there, in the same spot. Charles never mentioned it. No one else was allowed in the office. The only key to the cabinet hung from a chain on Charles's belt. Angela didn't want trouble, so she just did her work quietly. But still, she wondered what was inside. Papers? Contracts? Something more? Sometimes she would catch Charles sitting at his desk late at night, holding the briefcase open, reading something inside. As soon as she walked in, he would close it fast and stare at her, not saying a word. Angela would nod and walk out without asking anything. One morning, something unusual happened. Angela was passing by the hallway near the office when she heard Charles yelling on the phone. He wasn't just angry. He sounded stressed, like something serious had gone wrong. She couldn't understand everything, but she caught a few words: deal, no time, fix it, and risk. It wasn't the kind of talk she normally heard from him. His voice was louder, faster. It sounded like panic, not something Charles usually showed. Angela stopped walking and stood still for a moment, but then she moved away quickly so she wouldn't get caught eavesdropping. She went back to the kitchen to finish cleaning. The sound of the call stayed in her head. Later that day, when she returned to clean the office, she noticed the room looked different. The desk had a coffee stain, papers were moved around, and then she noticed something else. The black briefcase was gone. The cabinet was open. The briefcase, always locked away, was no longer there. Angela stood still for a second, staring at the empty space. She checked again, but it was clear. The briefcase wasn't anywhere in the office. She didn't know what to think. It had been there every day for months, and now, right after a tense phone call, it was missing. Her heart started to beat faster. She cleaned the room carefully, but kept thinking about what had changed. Why did Charles take the briefcase? Where did he go with it? Was it related to the call she heard earlier? She didn't ask anyone. She knew it wasn't her place to question the boss. But she felt something had shifted. The office didn't feel the same. It wasn't just about a missing item. It was the feeling in the air. Even the light coming through the window looked dull. Angela finished her work quickly and left the room. As she walked back to the kitchen, she felt a strange tension in the house, like something important had started. The rest of the day passed slowly. Angela went on with her tasks, trying to stay focused, but she kept thinking about the briefcase and the phone call. Charles didn't come down for lunch. He didn't show up at his usual time for his evening walk through the garden. No one knew where he was. The other staff didn't talk much. They had learned that silence was safer in that house. Angela said nothing to them. She kept working quietly, folding laundry, preparing tea, and helping Ethan organize his toys. But her mind kept going back to the office. That briefcase had never left its spot until today. Something had changed. Angela didn't know what the documents inside were about, but she had a feeling they mattered. She had cleaned enough rooms in her life to know when something big was happening. And now, in the Thornfield mansion, something big was definitely happening. The black briefcase was gone, and nothing felt normal anymore. In the next few days, things inside the Thornfield mansion started to feel strange. Angela noticed it first. The usual routine of the house continued, but there was something in the air that felt different. People walked more quietly. The other staff members didn't talk to her like before. When she entered a room, conversations stopped. Even Charles, who normally ignored her, now avoided her completely. He didn't look at her, didn't speak a single word, and changed his walking path to avoid crossing hers. Angela didn't understand why this was happening. She had done nothing wrong. She just kept doing her job the same way she always did. But the feeling of being watched or judged grew stronger every hour. The silence was heavier than usual. Every sound, like a door opening or footsteps, felt louder. Angela stayed calm on the outside, but inside she was starting to feel nervous. Something was going on, and she didn't know what it was or what it meant. Ethan also began acting differently. He had always been quiet and careful, but now he was pulling away from everything. He didn't want to play with his colored blocks. He didn't want to go to the garden. He didn't even want to eat his favorite foods. Angela tried to comfort him the way she always did. She sat next to him, lined up his toys, and hummed the soft songs he liked. But Ethan didn't respond. He turned his face away and rocked back and forth. She understood this behavior. It meant he was overwhelmed. He felt the tension too. Angela could tell that Ethan noticed how the adults were behaving. Even though no one explained anything to him, he sensed the change. The house felt colder to him. His safe world was changing, and he didn't know why. Angela stayed close, hoping her presence would still bring him peace. But even she was starting to feel unsure. The silence around them didn't feel safe anymore. One morning, while doing her usual cleaning routine, Angela entered the playroom. She planned to organize the toys and tidy the shelves. As she opened the cabinet where Ethan kept some of his old puzzles, she stopped. Inside the cabinet, pushed behind a stack of toy boxes, was the black briefcase. It was the same one that had disappeared from Charles's office days earlier. But now it was open. Angela didn't touch it. She leaned forward slightly and looked inside. It was empty. Completely empty. No papers, no folders, nothing. Her first instinct was to check if it was real, but she stopped herself. She remembered that Charles never wanted anyone near that briefcase. It wasn't supposed to be there, and it wasn't supposed to be open. Angela backed away slowly. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't move anything. Instead, she memorized the position, the angle, the way the lid was slightly bent. She knew this detail might be important later. Then she continued cleaning, acting normal. Later that afternoon, Charles returned to the house. Angela was walking through the hallway when he came in through the main door. Their eyes met for a second. He stopped walking. He looked at her in a cold, hard way. Not surprised, not angry, just blank. Angela had seen that look before. It was the same look Charles used when he was about to fire someone. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. His face told her everything. He stared at her for a moment longer, then walked away without a word. Angela stood still, unsure if she should keep working or go back to her room. She decided to keep cleaning, though her hands were shaking a little. Something had clearly changed. Charles didn't need to speak to make his message clear. Angela remembered the empty briefcase and wondered if he knew she had seen it. She didn't know what to expect now, but she could feel it. Something was coming. It was almost evening when 2 police officers arrived at the mansion. They didn't come with sirens or loud voices. It was all very quiet. They entered through the side entrance and spoke privately with Charles in his office. None of the other staff were told anything. Angela was in the kitchen when one of the officers walked in and called her name. She was confused, but followed him calmly. The officer didn't raise his voice. He looked serious, but not aggressive. She thought maybe it was a routine check or something related to the house, but then the second officer approached her and said clearly, "Don't resist." Angela didn't understand. "Resist what?" she asked, but they didn't answer. They just began walking her toward the living room. Her heart started beating faster. Everything felt too calm, too organized. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't fighting, but she didn't know what was happening. The silence was heavy, and the meaning behind "don't resist" stayed stuck in her mind. As Angela was being led through the living room, Ethan suddenly appeared. He had come looking for her, maybe sensing something was wrong. When he saw the 2 police officers holding her arms, his eyes went wide. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew something was very wrong. He screamed, loud, sharp, and full of panic. It was the loudest sound Angela had ever heard from him. His small hands shook. He took a few steps forward, then stopped, frozen. Angela turned to look at him. Her own eyes were full of fear and sadness. She tried to say something, but the officers pulled her away. Ethan screamed again. His voice echoed through the big, silent mansion. It was a sound that didn't belong in that place, a sound of pain. The staff nearby stood still, watching. No one moved, no one spoke. The silence that had filled the house all week was finally broken, not by words, but by Ethan's cry. Angela's arrest shocked everyone in the Thornfield mansion. The staff couldn't believe what had happened. One moment she was working like always, and the next she was being taken away by police officers. No one had seen her do anything wrong. She had always been quiet, kind and careful, but even though people were surprised, no one dared to question Charles Thornfield. He was the boss. He was powerful. If he said something, that was the end of the story. Charles told the police that some confidential documents had disappeared from his office, and Angela had been seen near the black briefcase the same day. That was enough for them. No one asked more questions. No one looked for more proof. The police didn't open an investigation. They only acted based on what Charles claimed. The house returned to silence, but it was a colder, darker silence now. Angela was gone, and no one knew if she would come back. No one even asked out loud. While the adults avoided talking about it, Ethan was falling apart. The boy who had once followed routines and quiet games now screamed and cried without stopping. He hit the walls, he bit his own hands, he ripped his drawings into pieces. The room that once felt peaceful became a place of chaos. Ethan no longer played with his colored blocks. He didn't sing, he didn't make eye contact. Nothing calmed him down. The staff tried helping, but it made things worse. He pushed them away. He didn't want anyone close. Charles barely came near his son. He was too busy with meetings and calls. Eventually, he hired a new caregiver to take Angela's place. The woman tried to follow Ethan's routine, but she didn't understand him. She spoke too loud. She touched his things without asking. Ethan didn't respond to her. He stayed silent most of the day. But sometimes he whispered one sentence over and over. No one really paid attention to the words. Every morning, and sometimes during the night, Ethan repeated the same phrase in a soft, shaky voice. "She didn't take anything. She cleans." He said it again and again. Sometimes sitting under a table, sometimes curled up in a corner, rocking back and forth. The new caregiver thought it was just one of his habits, a phrase stuck in his memory. She wrote it in her notes, but didn't ask questions. Charles ignored it completely. To him, Ethan was just being difficult, reacting like a child always does in stressful situations. The other workers in the mansion just lowered their heads and stayed quiet. No one wanted to get involved. They didn't want to risk their jobs or face Charles's anger. So the words kept floating in the background, lost among the silence. But to Ethan, they were important. He was trying to say something the only way he knew how. He couldn't explain details, but in his mind, the truth was simple. Angela was innocent. After a week of emotional breakdowns, Charles finally called for a professional. A therapist named Lucy arrived one afternoon. She was calm, young, and experienced in working with children like Ethan. She was not part of the regular staff, so she didn't carry the same fear that everyone else had around Charles. From the first moment she saw Ethan, she noticed the tension. The boy didn't look at her. He was curled up on the floor, holding a torn piece of paper in his hands. The caregiver explained his behaviors and repeated the usual reports. Lucy listened, but she focused on Ethan. She watched him carefully, giving him space. She didn't try to force conversation. She sat a few meters away and waited. After several minutes, she heard the phrase. Ethan said it again without looking up. "She didn't take anything. She cleans." The caregiver rolled her eyes and said, "He keeps saying that." But Lucy didn't ignore it. Her eyes narrowed slightly. To her, it didn't sound random. Lucy returned the next day and stayed longer. This time she brought some toys and drawing materials. She didn't try to touch Ethan or talk too much. She just set the items nearby and waited. After an hour, he picked up a blue crayon and made a single line on paper. He didn't speak. But 20 minutes later, he said it again, a little louder. "She didn't take anything. She cleans." Lucy leaned in slightly, but stayed calm. "Who are you talking about?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't reply, but he tapped the crayon twice and looked down. Lucy knew repetition could mean many things, but this was different. It wasn't just a stuck phrase. It was connected to emotion. The way he said it, the moments he chose, the sadness in his voice, it all meant something. Lucy wrote the words in her notebook. She circled them. While others had ignored the sentence, Lucy saw it clearly. It was not repetition. It was a message. Over the next few sessions, Lucy stayed close to Ethan's world. She built trust slowly. She didn't rush him. And each time she heard the phrase again, she didn't take anything. She cleans. Ethan would say it while drawing, while hiding under furniture, or while looking out the window. Lucy began to ask questions in different ways. Who is she? What did she clean? What do you remember? Ethan didn't always answer. Sometimes he just rocked quietly or stared into space. But sometimes his eyes filled with tears and he clutched his drawings tightly. Lucy believed him. She didn't know the whole story yet, but she knew Ethan was holding on to something real. He had seen something, remembered something. And deep inside all that silence, he was crying for help the only way he knew how. While everyone else accepted Charles's version, Lucy listened to the boy. Ethan's words weren't random at all. They were the first real clue to the truth behind Angela's fall. Lucy spent more time with Ethan each day. She was quiet, calm, and never forced him to talk. Instead, she brought crayons and paper and let him draw whatever he wanted. Over time, she noticed something strange. Ethan kept drawing the same things. Page after page showed the same room, the same objects, and the same people. One part of the drawing showed a big bookshelf. Another part always showed a tall figure wearing a blue suit. Near that figure there was always a black briefcase, drawn carefully with straight lines. And in the corner of every drawing there was a small person wearing yellow gloves. The gloves were always bright and easy to notice. Lucy looked closely at each drawing. The person with yellow gloves never touched the briefcase. They were always far from it. But there was something else. A hand, without a face, always reaching for the case. This hand appeared again and again. Lucy began to feel something wasn't right. She kept studying Ethan's drawings. She didn't rush him or ask too many questions. She just sat near him while he worked. She gave short, soft comments like, "Nice lines," or, "Is this the same room again?" Slowly, Ethan started making eye contact. He didn't speak much, but his behavior changed. He began nodding or pointing when she asked simple questions. One afternoon, Lucy asked, "Who wears the yellow gloves?" Ethan looked at the drawing, then pointed at himself. Lucy understood right away. The small person in the drawings was Ethan. "And who is this?" she asked, pointing to the tall figure in the blue suit. Ethan didn't answer, but when she pointed to the faceless hand near the briefcase, he shook his head and pressed his lips together. Lucy didn't push. She just nodded. Every day, she collected the drawings and studied the patterns. There was a story here, and it wasn't a made-up one. Ethan was trying to say something important with his drawings. Then one day, Ethan drew something different. The colors were the same. The elements were still there. Bookshelf, blue-suited figure, briefcase, and the gloved child. But this time, the black briefcase was not in the middle of the room. Instead, it was behind something. A tall cabinet. The way it was drawn made it look like it had been hidden on purpose. Ethan pointed to the cabinet in the picture, then looked up at Lucy. He didn't speak, but his eyes were clear. He wanted her to notice this detail. Lucy asked gently, "Did you see this happen?" Ethan didn't speak. He just nodded once and went back to coloring. Lucy held the paper in her hand longer than usual. This was new information. No one had ever said anything about a hiding spot. It wasn't in the reports, and the police had never mentioned it. Lucy felt something tighten in her chest. Maybe the real story was different from what everyone had believed. Lucy didn't tell anyone what she saw in the drawing. She decided to look into it herself, very carefully. She didn't want Charles to know what she suspected. That could be dangerous. That afternoon, while Ethan was with the caregiver, Lucy walked to the playroom. She acted normal, like she was just taking a look at the space for therapy purposes. She looked at the cabinet near the corner of the room, the same one Ethan had drawn. She opened it slowly. Inside were toys and books. Nothing unusual, but then she noticed something on the floor. Light marks near the cabinet legs. The cabinet had been moved recently. The marks were too clean, too fresh. She looked at the floor closely and saw two thin lines in the dust. Something heavy had been dragged in. Lucy didn't touch anything else. She stepped back, took a deep breath and left the room. What Ethan had drawn was real. Someone had hidden the briefcase and then moved it again. Lucy returned the next day with a plan. She kept acting like everything was normal. She did her regular session with Ethan and listened carefully as he made soft sounds while drawing. This time, she didn't ask many questions. She wanted to give him space. But in her notebook, she made new notes about the toy room. After her session, she walked past the cabinet again and looked for more clues. Behind it, she noticed a small scratch on the wall, like something sharp had rubbed against it. Below that, another faint mark on the baseboard. These marks were not old, they were too clean. Lucy pulled out her phone and quietly took photos. She didn't know exactly what had been inside the briefcase, but one thing was now clear. Angela didn't hide it. Ethan's drawings always placed him, the child with yellow gloves, far from the case. The faceless hand was someone else's. Lucy knew she had to be smart. She couldn't confront Charles yet. As Lucy left the room, she passed by the hallway and saw Charles talking on the phone. He looked serious. When he saw her, he stopped talking for a moment, gave her a quick nod, then went back to his call. Lucy kept walking, pretending nothing had changed, but inside her mind was racing. She believed Ethan now more than ever. He had witnessed something important, and his drawings were his way of remembering. Angela had not taken the documents. Someone else had moved the briefcase. Lucy didn't know who the faceless hand belonged to, but she was sure it wasn't Ethan, and it wasn't Angela either. She needed to be careful with her next steps. The truth was hidden under layers of silence, fear, and control. But the first piece of the puzzle had come from a child who didn't use words, only drawings. Lucy now had proof that something didn't match Charles's story. And that proof started with one small picture of a hidden briefcase. Lucy knew she needed help. The drawings, the clues on the floor, and Ethan's words were not enough on their own. She needed something stronger, something legal. So she contacted a trusted family friend named David. He was a lawyer with experience in difficult cases, and most importantly, he was someone Lucy could trust. They met in a quiet cafe outside the city. Lucy brought copies of Ethan's drawings, photos of the scratch marks near the cabinet, and notes from her sessions. She explained everything, how Ethan kept repeating that Angela didn't take anything, how the briefcase was found in a strange place, and how the behavior of everyone in the house had changed since her arrest. David listened carefully, asking precise questions. When Lucy told him about the faceless hand in the drawings, he looked serious. "This might not just be a mistake," he said. "It might be something planned." They began discussing the possibility that someone had planted false evidence to trap Angela. While Lucy and David were making their plans, Ethan continued doing what he could. He still didn't speak in full sentences, but he was trying hard to help. Every day during their sessions, he repeated a few important words. Sometimes it was "daddy." Other times, he would say "hide" or "box." He also started pointing to objects in the house, especially the cameras on the walls. Lucy started paying close attention. One afternoon, Ethan pointed at a corner camera in the hallway and said, "Box, Papa, hide." That was when Lucy understood something. He had seen Charles doing something. Maybe he had hidden the briefcase himself. Maybe he had staged the whole scene. But why? What was he trying to protect? Lucy wrote down every word Ethan said. She drew a map of where the cameras were located inside the house. Slowly, the puzzle was coming together. The idea that Charles had planned everything to make Angela look guilty was no longer a theory. It was becoming real. Lucy knew there were security cameras in most rooms of the house, including the hallway, the entrance to Charles's office, and the playroom. If Ethan had seen something, maybe the cameras had recorded it. But when Lucy tried to access the system, she couldn't. Everything was protected by passwords. So she decided to speak to the housekeeper, a woman named Mariana who had worked at the mansion for years. Lucy chose her words carefully. She didn't accuse anyone. She simply said she was worried about something Ethan had seen. To her surprise, Mariana looked nervous. After a pause, she confessed that something was strange. The footage from the day Angela was arrested, all of it, had been erased. "I didn't do it," she said, "but I saw Charles using the system that night. The next morning, all the files were gone." Lucy's heart pounded. This was serious. Charles had erased the evidence, but there was still a chance, one small camera that was broken. Mariana mentioned that a small wall camera near the back hallway had been under maintenance. It wasn't part of the main system and stored video separately. It had been forgotten during the cleanup. Lucy asked if there was any way to get that footage. Mariana said yes. She went to the maintenance closet and pulled out a small device. It had limited recordings, but it held video from that week. They plugged it into a laptop. The video was shaky, and the angle was bad, mostly showing a portion of the hallway floor and the bottom part of people walking by. But then something important appeared. The shape of a black briefcase. A man walking quickly. A part of a suit jacket. Then clearly, Charles's shoes and hand holding the case. The video showed him carrying the briefcase before Angela was accused of anything. Lucy immediately sent the footage to David. For the first time, they had something solid. Proof that Charles had lied. This changed everything. David reviewed the video several times. He slowed it down, zoomed in on the frame where the briefcase could be clearly seen, and took screenshots. He checked the date and time on the footage. Everything matched Lucy's notes. Charles had the briefcase in his hands before the supposed discovery that led to Angela's arrest. That meant the entire situation was false. David was careful. He didn't want to act too fast. "We need to follow the legal steps," he told Lucy. "But we can use this." Lucy asked what would happen next. David explained that this video was enough to request a review of the case. It would also raise questions about the other missing files and why they were deleted. Lucy felt a mix of relief and worry. They had something now, but Charles was still powerful. If he found out they had the footage, he might try to cover it up again. They had to move fast but stay quiet. The truth was coming. Inside the mansion, everything continued as usual, at least on the surface. Charles walked through the halls like nothing had happened. The staff obeyed his orders, but underneath it all, a quiet tension was building. Lucy kept working with Ethan like always. She didn't change her behavior, but she knew the truth was starting to come out. Every drawing, every word Ethan had spoken had led to this. The small broken camera, ignored by everyone else, had recorded a piece of the real story. Charles had carried the briefcase himself. He had erased the other footage. He had blamed Angela. But now the silence was breaking. David was preparing a formal request to reopen the case. Mariana agreed to testify if needed. Lucy didn't celebrate yet, but she felt hopeful. Angela had been treated unfairly, but maybe things could still be made right. Ethan had spoken, not with long sentences, but with his actions. And in the end, it was his voice that started to reveal the truth. It was a quiet morning when Ethan gave another clue. He was sitting near the window during one of his sessions with Lucy. She placed crayons and paper on the table as usual. Ethan didn't speak much at first. He looked outside toward the garden. Then, without any words, he picked up a red crayon and started drawing. He drew the garden, the fountain, and patches of ground around it. But what stood out were the red X's he added. There were several of them, all drawn carefully near the fountain area. Lucy leaned in and asked gently, "What are these?" Ethan pointed to the garden outside the window. He touched the drawing and pointed again. Then he tapped his hand twice on the paper and looked at Lucy. It wasn't random. He was trying to say something. Lucy showed the picture to David that afternoon. They both agreed. Ethan had seen something buried in the garden. This was more than a drawing. It was a map. Lucy and David knew they couldn't just go dig around the garden without permission. They needed a legal warrant to search the property. David worked quickly and filed a request for a search warrant, using the drawing as part of the supporting evidence. Since there was already suspicion of forgery and tampering with video evidence, the court approved it. The next morning, police officers arrived at the Thornfield mansion with the official papers. Charles was not home when they came. Lucy stood by quietly as the officers followed the map Ethan had drawn. They went straight to the garden near the fountain. It didn't take long. Under one of the large decorative stones, the officers found something buried. It was a sealed folder, protected with plastic and wrapped tightly. Inside were papers, lots of them, legal documents, financial records, and confidential files. All of them were exactly what Charles had said were stolen, but they hadn't been stolen. They had been hidden by him. The officers laid the documents out on a table and began checking them one by one. Everything was in perfect condition. Nothing had been taken or destroyed. The signatures were real. The paper was dry and clean. David looked through the files and quickly recognized some of the documents that had been used to accuse Angela. They matched copies Charles had shown as proof of her supposed crime. But now it was clear. The documents had never been taken. They were buried in the garden the whole time. This wasn't just about a false accusation anymore. Hiding those documents suggested something much more serious: corporate fraud, destruction of evidence, and possible obstruction of justice. David took pictures of everything and made backup copies. Lucy watched quietly. Ethan's drawing had led them to the exact spot. She felt a wave of relief and pride. The little boy who barely spoke had just helped uncover something huge. His silence had been louder than any words. That same afternoon, David began preparing a formal complaint against Charles Thornfield. He collected all the evidence they had gathered: the erased footage, the hidden documents, the recordings from the small hallway camera, and even Ethan's drawings. Everything was organized and placed in a secure folder. David also called a well-known investigative journalist named Rafael Mendez. He had a reputation for exposing corruption and corporate crimes. David shared the full story, including how a child with autism had provided the key to unlocking the case. Rafael was shocked by what he heard and promised to run the story as soon as possible. David knew that public attention could help put pressure on the court system. Sometimes the media worked faster than the law. That night, the story was published online. Billionaire accused of framing Maid to hide financial crimes. It spread fast. People started asking questions. Journalists called the Thornfield Company. Social media exploded. The image of Charles Thornfield began to crack. As the news spread, public opinion began to shift. At first, many people believed Charles's version of the story. He was rich, respected, and known for his influence. But now, there were facts, real evidence. The camera footage, the erased files, and the documents found in the garden proved that something dishonest had happened. People started to doubt Charles. Support grew for Angela. Online, thousands of comments called for her release. Some former employees even shared their own stories about how strict and controlling Charles had been in the past. David pushed for a full investigation, and the court agreed to reopen the case. Angela, still in prison, was notified that new evidence had been discovered. She didn't know all the details yet, but for the first time since her arrest, there was hope. And behind all this progress was Ethan, a quiet boy who had spoken with drawings, sounds, and small actions. He didn't explain everything. He didn't need to. He had already told the truth. The garden was quiet again, but it was no longer just a peaceful part of the mansion. It had become the place where everything changed, a space where truth was hidden and then uncovered. Lucy sat with Ethan near the window and handed him a new set of crayons. He picked the red one first. She smiled but said nothing. He began drawing a house, a tree, and a small figure wearing yellow gloves. He wasn't just drawing for fun. He was telling stories in the only way he could. Lucy watched him closely, knowing that the most important part of this case had never come from reports, police, or lawyers. It had come from a child who noticed everything and remembered it all. Because of him, people had started to listen. Because of him, Angela's name would be cleared. Lucy looked outside, past the garden, and felt something new. Justice was finally beginning, and it all started with Ethan, pointing to the ground and drawing red X's. The reaction from the media was too strong to be ignored. After the story about Angela's false accusation was published, national news outlets picked it up. TV stations, newspapers, and websites reported the case. People across the country were talking about it. The pressure on the justice system became intense. Judges and prosecutors started to receive questions from reporters and the public. Why was Angela arrested without proper investigation? Why was the evidence ignored? And how could someone like Charles Thornfield have so much unchecked power? In response to the growing attention, the court announced a formal re-evaluation of the entire case. A new team of investigators was assigned. Lucy and David were asked to share all the files they had collected. The hidden documents, erased camera footage, and the footage from the hallway camera were officially accepted as part of the evidence. This was the first time the justice system truly looked at the case from all angles. Charles was no longer untouchable. Charles Thornfield tried to stay calm in public. He gave short interviews, saying that the situation was misunderstood and that he had nothing to hide. He used his usual calm voice and professional appearance. He even tried to redirect blame onto others, suggesting that mistakes were made by his staff, not by him. But the media wasn't buying it. The evidence was too detailed, and people had already formed their own opinions. Behind the scenes, Charles was panicking. He made phone calls late into the night, met with lawyers, and tried to contact old allies. But this time, many people didn't answer. Some of his former business partners were already backing away. They didn't want to be associated with him. Charles had always controlled the narrative, always stayed 10 steps ahead. But now he was reacting, not leading. His usual tactics weren't working. The pressure was real, and the cracks in his perfect image were beginning to show. For the first time, Charles Thornfield was not in control. Meanwhile, the court requested an informal testimony from Ethan. Because of his condition, the process had to be done with care. Lucy, along with a child psychologist, accompanied Ethan during the session. They met in a quiet, private room. No courtroom, no suits, no pressure. Just a table, some crayons, and a safe environment. The goal was simple: let Ethan express what he saw, how he saw it. As always, Ethan didn't use many words. Instead, he drew. On one sheet of paper, he carefully drew a man in a blue suit, handing papers to another man. The second figure was unknown, wearing dark clothes. Between them was a bag full of money. Ethan pointed to the blue-suited man and quietly said, "Daddy." That moment changed everything. Lucy kept calm, but took a photo of the drawing and shared it with David. This was more than a child's sketch. It was a visual memory, a clear scene that suggested something serious, an illegal exchange. David took Ethan's drawing and began checking timelines. If the event really happened, there had to be some way to confirm it. He started with Charles's GPS records, taken from company vehicles and devices, and he cross-referenced the date with Ethan's description. The results were shocking and clear. On the same day Ethan had drawn, Charles's phone had pinged several times at a hotel downtown. There was no meeting on his schedule for that day, no emails, no calls, no records. But the GPS didn't lie. Charles had spent nearly an hour at the hotel in a private suite with no official business reason. David called the hotel and, with help from legal channels, confirmed that Charles had indeed rented the room that afternoon. The name of the second man couldn't be confirmed yet, but there was now physical evidence that matched Ethan's drawing. The picture was no longer just a child's memory. It was real, and it proved Charles was hiding more than anyone thought. As the investigation moved forward, the story gained even more national attention. News anchors began discussing Ethan, the quiet boy who helped reveal the truth. His drawings were shown on screens, and articles explained how a child with autism exposed a billionaire's lies. The public demanded answers. With all the new evidence on the table, the court approved Angela's release. She didn't return home in secret. Instead, the court held a small public event where a formal apology was given. It wasn't from Charles, he stayed silent, but from the judge who had originally approved the arrest. He admitted that the decision had been rushed and that important information was ignored. Angela stood quietly, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. She didn't speak much, but her face showed relief. After everything, she was finally free, and people were beginning to see the truth. Charles, on the other hand, had lost something more valuable than power: his public trust. Back at the mansion, Charles sat alone in his office. The walls were the same, the paintings in place, the furniture untouched, but nothing felt like before. The silence around him was not peaceful. It was heavy. He stared at the empty space where the black briefcase used to sit. His reflection in the glass of the window looked tired, older. For years, he had controlled everything: the business, the staff, the image. But now the story had escaped his grip. He couldn't stop the investigation. He couldn't erase Ethan's drawings. He couldn't hide the footage or the documents anymore. The truth had come out in pieces, and each piece had made his world smaller. His reputation was damaged, his influence fading. For the first time in years, Charles Thornfield felt something unfamiliar: fear. The mask he wore so well, calm, successful, strong, was cracked. And the whole world could finally see what was underneath. He wasn't the man he pretended to be, not anymore. Angela stepped out of the building where she had been held for months. She didn't say anything as the cameras flashed and reporters called her name. She looked calm, but her eyes showed how much she had been through. Waiting near the exit was Lucy, holding Ethan's hand. As soon as Ethan saw Angela, he let go of Lucy and ran toward her. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He just wrapped his arms around Angela and held her tight. Then for the first time, he began to cry. His small shoulders shook. He buried his face into Angela's shoulder and stayed there. Angela hugged him back, holding him close without saying a word. People nearby stopped talking. Even the reporters stayed quiet. The moment was honest and full of meaning. The cameras kept rolling, but no one wanted to interrupt. The boy who had stayed silent through everything was now showing his deepest feeling. And all he needed was Angela back by his side. In the following days, while Charles began facing his legal troubles in court, Angela was invited to speak on national television. Her story had become famous. People across the country followed her case. The interview was calm and respectful. The host asked her about her experience, about how she was treated, and what she planned to do next. The final question was direct. Do you plan to sue Charles Thornfield for everything you went through? Angela didn't rush her answer. She sat still, looked down for a moment, then looked back at the camera. Her voice was steady and clear. What he destroyed, she said, cannot be bought with money. But I choose not to carry what belongs to him. I choose to live. Her words were simple, but powerful. Social media lit up. People began sharing her message everywhere. Her choice to forgive without forgetting touched people deeply. She wasn't weak. She was choosing peace, and that made her stronger than anyone expected. The impact of Angela's words was felt in every corner of the country. News channels replayed the interview. Talk shows discussed her strength. Articles were written about her response, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was honest. People admired how she didn't let hatred take over her life. And while the media focused on the case, something even more important was happening quietly in the Thornfield mansion. Ethan was healing. Day by day, his behavior changed. He started eating better, without needing to be reminded. He slept through the night, without waking up crying. He went back to his favorite routines, arranging his colored blocks, lining up his toy cars, and drawing. This time, his drawings were different. No more red X's, no more hidden briefcases. He drew the garden, the kitchen, and himself holding Angela's hand. The fear was leaving his body. He was calm again, safe again. His world, once broken by confusion and loss, was slowly coming back together. Lucy watched Ethan closely during this time. She noticed every small change, the way he looked around the room, how he responded to music, and how he moved his fingers with more ease. She knew this wasn't just recovery. This was transformation through connection. She wrote an article about her experience with Ethan, focusing on the power of active listening in children with autism. She explained how Ethan, even without full sentences, had communicated exactly what he needed. She shared details about how trust, patience, and observation led to truth. The article was published in a respected journal and quickly spread among educators, psychologists, and parents. Many wrote to Lucy, thanking her for sharing something so personal and real. The piece wasn't just about Ethan. It was about how children are often misunderstood, and how, with the right support, their voices can still be heard. Lucy didn't try to become famous from it. She just wanted others to see what she saw in Ethan: intelligence, emotion, and courage. While healing spread through Angela and Ethan's life, Charles Thornfield sat alone in a courtroom. His lawyers spoke for him, but his silence said more. He watched the evidence presented piece by piece: the erased footage, the buried documents, the secret meeting caught by GPS, and Ethan's drawing that matched it all. Every attempt to defend himself fell apart. The judge didn't look impressed. The jury looked uncomfortable. People in the audience whispered quietly. The name Charles Thornfield, once respected in financial and business circles, now meant something else. It was tied to lies, control, and injustice. Charles, who used to walk into rooms with confidence and power, now looked like a man waiting for the consequences of his choices. He no longer had cameras following him for praise. He had reporters documenting his fall. His company was under investigation. His staff had resigned. His reputation was broken, and this time there was no one left to blame but himself. Outside the courthouse, someone held up a sign that read, "Justice for Angela, respect for Ethan." It was simple, hand-drawn with black marker. A small crowd stood nearby, not shouting, just standing together. Angela walked by quietly, holding Ethan's hand. He wasn't afraid of the people or the cameras anymore. He walked calmly, matching her steps. The world had seen everything: the false story, the pain, the silence, and finally, the truth. And now, it was beginning to move forward. Angela didn't smile for attention. Ethan didn't wave. They simply kept walking. In homes around the country, people talked about forgiveness. Teachers used Lucy's article in classrooms. Parents read more carefully into their children's actions. A new kind of awareness was growing, all starting from a boy who didn't speak much, a woman who refused to give in to hate, and a therapist who chose to listen. The name Thornfield had changed forever, but what remained strongest was a hug, a drawing, and a choice to forgive. After everything that had happened, the pain, the injustice, the long months of silence and waiting, Angela decided it was time to build something new. She didn't want her story to end in bitterness. With financial support from a court-ordered compensation fund and donations from people who followed her case, she created a place with real purpose. It would not be a charity. It would be a center for care, support, and rebuilding. She named it the Ethan Institute, in honor of the boy who had said so much without many words. The goal was simple: help children with autism and support women who had suffered injustice, just like Angela had. The announcement came during a small event attended by families, teachers, and volunteers. People were moved. It wasn't just about helping others. It was about creating a safe space, something Angela never had when she needed it most. She promised that at the Ethan Institute, no one would be ignored or silenced again. Lucy stood proudly beside Angela at the launch event. After working closely with Ethan and seeing his unique way of expressing truth, she believed deeply in the Institute's mission. Angela asked her to become co-founder and lead the educational programs. Lucy didn't hesitate. She immediately began designing a learning structure that didn't force children to fit into one system. Instead, it adapted to their ways of thinking and communicating. She worked with therapists, educators, and families to build something different, a center where neurodivergent children could feel seen and understood. One of the key areas of the Institute was the listening room, a calm space where children with autism could express themselves through drawing, sound, objects, or movement. No pressure to talk, just safe ways to communicate. Lucy knew that this room alone could prevent misunderstandings like the one that had almost ruined Ethan's life. She believed that listening carefully, with intention and respect, could change everything. The listening room became the heart of the Institute. The Ethan Institute also opened doors for women who had been treated unfairly by the justice system or other institutions. Angela remembered how alone she felt when she was falsely accused, so she made sure no woman ever felt that way again. A special program was created to offer free legal advice, psychological counseling, and job training for women restarting their lives. Volunteers helped teach professional skills, from computer literacy to administrative tasks. Some women came after losing jobs unfairly. Others had faced abuse or false accusations, just like Angela. Slowly, with patience, they began to trust again. Angela spoke to every woman who walked through the door. She greeted them with respect and kindness. Many cried during their first visit, not because they were sad, but because someone finally believed them. The Ethan Institute wasn't just a place of learning. It became a place of emotional recovery, a space where pain was acknowledged but not allowed to define the future. It gave people a second chance. Ethan, now a little older and more verbal, became a quiet symbol of the Institute's success. He attended some of the group activities, especially those involving drawing and sensory games. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were clearer. He asked questions. He joined the other kids during art sessions and showed them how to use shapes and colors to tell stories. Everyone admired him, but no one treated him like a hero. Angela made sure of that. Ethan wasn't responsible for saving the world. He was just a boy who deserved to grow without fear. Still, the other children respected him. Some even copied his style when drawing. One day, during a painting session, Ethan made something special. He painted himself and Angela standing under a large tree, holding hands. The image was peaceful, simple, and full of meaning. That painting was later printed on the main sign at the Institute's entrance. It became the official symbol of everything they stood for. Meanwhile, Charles Thornfield was no longer in the headlines. The trial had ended, and he'd been found guilty of fraud, obstruction of justice, and false accusation. He was sentenced to prison and removed from all leadership roles in his former companies. His assets were frozen, and the name Thornfield was now linked to corruption and abuse of power. Charles did not speak publicly after the verdict. There were no statements, no interviews. He stayed quiet, away from public life. Ethan never mentioned him again. Angela didn't either. There was no reason to. The story had moved on, and their lives were now built around healing, not revenge. Every corner of the Ethan Institute reminded visitors that one man's cruelty did not win. What had won instead was truth, not shouted in anger, but quietly revealed through small actions. Charles had tried to control everything. In the end, his silence became permanent, while Ethan's silence had sparked a movement that would help thousands. Years later, when visitors walked through the doors of the Ethan Institute, they often paused at the large painting near the entrance. It showed a boy and a woman under a tree, holding hands, painted in bright, simple colors. Some knew the full story, others just saw a beautiful image. But everyone could feel something honest in the picture. They learned that the boy once helped uncover the truth about a powerful man, not with long speeches or dramatic gestures, but with drawings and a few careful words. Lucy often told new staff members, "Here we listen deeply, because one quiet child changed everything." Angela, now working in the background, often watched the children from the hallway with a quiet smile. She knew they were building something that would last. And in the end, the message was clear. The truth doesn't always need loud voices. Sometimes it lives in the small hands of a child, in the quiet space of a listening room, and in the choice to believe. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.